beginning, inshallah, around 8:15. We will shorten this segment and we will cut down the question answer session. Anyways, let me just welcome Chairman FBR and our former President, Shafar Zahidi. Please join me in giving a big hand. Now may I request Mr. Saqib Shirani, former Principal Economic Advisor, Government of Pakistan, and a renowned business consultant having a deep-rooted knowledge about the tax reform in Pakistan. Saqib Sahab needs no introduction, and mashallah, I am extremely grateful to him that on just a call, he has agreed to be part of ICAP function, and I hope his deep insight and his knowledge in the taxation will benefit us for a long time to come. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Saqib Shirani.
Thank you, Ishfaq Sahab. Assalamu alaikum, Chairman FBR, President ICAP, distinguished members. I'm sure you've had very technical and detailed sessions before this. Obviously, as you can imagine, I'm going to step back a bit and talk about the budget from a different perspective. And this is the perspective of the macroeconomic context and the challenges of tax reform and the agenda of tax reform that we have. And I'm glad the Chairman of FBR is here, even though he is obviously familiar with my views for the last 10 years or so. But it's important, I think, to talk about the context first, because the discussion will be anchored in what the context is, and the budget is a response to a certain macroeconomic environment. So if we are obviously all familiar with the macroeconomic environment, but I think it's important for the discussion to go ahead to just examine it very quickly. We have below par growth for a number of years now. In fact, there is a secular decline in economic growth in Pakistan for at least the last 10 years or so. Our growth is also not exports driven. We have low and falling investment rates, not just of the government, but also the private sector, more importantly, the private sector. There is a huge tax revenue, tax collection challenge. And as a result of that, and the two slides that I want to show you a bit later, as a direct result of that, there is a spiraling public debt issue. Now this of course is an extremely daunting challenge for the budget makers, because there are some inherent tensions and trade-offs that are embedded in trying to address these challenges. There are also two special challenges which I want to draw out, because they're actually nested within the earlier challenges, but they're usually not talked about as much as they should be. The first is that our tax regime, our tax system, our tax framework, our tax practice burdens the formal sector. And it creates, or has created over the last many years, an arbitrage, what I call a tax arbitrage, between the formal sector and the informal sector. And that actually disincentivizes the formal sector and incentivizes informalization of the economy. And that is one key reason we are facing this problem of non-documentation in the economy. The second is regional disparities. And I think a lot of these challenges in this very difficult circumstances which have been acquired by this government, a lot of these challenges are trying to be addressed in this budget. Now, very quickly, I just want to put some numbers to this. This is Pakistan's exports to GDP. We normally talk about exports in dollar terms. I think it's far better to look at it, what is the size of the export sector relative to the economy? Because this tells you really whether the export sector is thriving or the non-tradable sector. And if the non-tradable sector is thriving, one, Pakistan is an outlier, because this is not the case with other countries. And two, it shows that there's some embedded anti-export biases in the policy side that need to be addressed. So clearly Pakistan's export sector is in trouble, and this slide shows it. But I think this slide shows even how much of a trouble. Because in the last 45 years, no dynamic emerging market economy has progressed without being driven by the export sector. Pakistan is an exception. We have to change that. So if you look at Vietnam, it's entirely export-oriented. Same goes for Cambodia, it's a smaller example. But I'd like to bring out two countries on this slide, Bangladesh and India. About 10 or 12 years ago, India and Pakistan both were at about 11 to 13% of GDP, the export sector. India's export sector has moved from that to about 19% of GDP. This mind you, this includes goods and services. And Bangladesh, which used to be about 7 to 7.5% of GDP, the export sector, has doubled, whereas Pakistan's export sector has halved over this period of time. So clearly a lot to worry about, and that's the reason for the currency crisis that we faced in 2008 and then 2018 and 19. The other thing, of course, which the budget makers have to address is the fact that Pakistan's investment is falling from a low base. So private investment is roughly half of South Asia, and it's also declining. So that's another really worrying challenge. And if you look at the consumption versus investment equation, what you find is that Pakistan is on the wrong axis. We are hugely consumption driven, and I think that's another thing that budget makers should address over a period of budgets, is to target consumption and to motivate investment. And as a result of all these, and I'll show you the direct linkage between all this and public debt in the last 5 years, between 2013 and 18, specifically, increased by about 80%. In rupee terms, right? So there are some very serious macroeconomic consequences of having an unsustainable tax system. And Pakistan's current tax system, and I'm glad the chairman FBR has said exactly the things he's been saying for the last 15 years, that Pakistan's tax system is actually a huge vulnerability, and we cannot continue, on the current path with this tax system. It underfunds the state, it chokes development, it stops growth and investment, it's mortgaging the future, and it's unfair and inequitable. So we know what the revenue challenge is, it's extremely low, but I think there's an expenditure challenge as well, which I want to bring out. Not just that we do not prioritize and we do not spend, we have leakages in what we allocate, but unfortunately, we are also under-allocating in some key social sector areas, in physical infrastructure, but primarily in education and health. And unfortunately, this budget is going to be a continuation of an IMF mindset, and therefore, for the next 3 years, we'll also be underspending in these key areas. And the way I look at it is, if you take out the interest part from the budget, what Pakistan is spending is roughly about 5 to 7 percentage points less than what it should be spending on operations and maintenance of the current infrastructure, on new physical infrastructure, on education, on health, etc. So this is also another challenge that we need to look at. But if you look at now, come back to what I said a bit earlier, the impact of the current tax system on public debt. So the actual public debt to GDP is roughly about 70% now. This is a 2 years old slide number, but it's still indicative and still valid. So even if you take it as 65% of GDP, if Pakistan had collected or increased its tax to GDP ratio and kept it at 13% since 2005, when the tax collection really wasn't on an increasing path in absolute terms, but perhaps not in terms of the size of the GDP, as it should have been, if we had maintained this 13%, and this additional revenue that we had collected, we had actually not frittered it away, right, through leakages and corruption and etc., and utilized it well, then Pakistan's potential tax to GDP today would have been 23% of GDP, i.e. it would have been 42 percentage points of GDP less. And just applying the rough effective interest rate the government pays, this would have meant that today, in this budget, when the interest payments are roughly 5% of GDP, they would have been only 0.8% of GDP. 4.2 percentage points of GDP in the current environment, in the current budget, could have been allocated for social spending, for the Benazir income support program, for education and for health. That is the damage which the tax system and the underfunding or the revenue inadequacy of the tax system has caused to Pakistan's budget. Just one element that I wanted to bring out. Now, of course, there are a number of reasons or a number of objectives of revenue collection, but I think today I'm just going to focus on, given the nature of this discussion, on one of them, which is encouraging investment and growth. Because I think this is where it's failing. The tax system and perhaps, of course, the budget, because of its own constraints, is not being able to go far enough in this direction. So what is the link with investment and growth? Now, if you look at a dysfunctional tax system which Pakistan has, it has bad policies, it has bad administration, weak enforcement and corruption. This leads to predatory taxation. Many of you may have heard me saying this over the last many years. I've used this word, predatory taxation, because what happens is, and unfortunately under the current IMF program or under any IMF program, even the one that we had in 2013, this situation exacerbates. This becomes worse. Because what the IMF tells you is, every 3 months you need to collect certain amounts of revenues. Because you need to meet the fiscal deficit target, you need to meet the primary deficit target. And that does not allow policymakers, or the chairman FPR, or members FPR, or FPR as an organization to introduce the needed reforms in tax administration. So in a sense, I'll end with this right at the end, but let me also give you a preview of what I'll say, that the IMF program is actually anti-reform in some of the most critical elements. We may praise it, sitting here in the Ministry of Finance or the FPR or whatever, but at the heart of it, for me, the most important element of it is completely anti-reform, because it will not allow FPR to restructure itself, to reform itself. It will only give them one target. They can do one of two things. They can either chase the formal sector, they already pay, the already sort of documented people, or they can go after new taxpayers, which will take time and they will not deliver the revenues. Unfortunately, they've been forced into this narrow alley where they will only be able to do one thing, which is predatory taxation. And what that will do is, and a reliance on indirect taxation. And what that will do is, it will produce suboptimal outcomes for the economy, because it's bad for investment, it's bad for formalization of the economy, it's good for informality, and it's bad for jobs creation. So this is a danger, unfortunately, that we may have been forced into by the IMF program. Shabar Saab and both the chairman FPR and the advisor are familiar with this. It will be a key challenge for them to actually wiggle out of it. If you look at the domestic constraints, and once again this is a slightly older slide, this is a World Bank survey done in 2015 or thereabouts, of what the key challenges are for businesses in Pakistan. And if you look at this, at the height of the electricity crisis, it was there, political stability was there, but tax administration was in the top 4 challenges. And I think that's why it's really important to get tax administration reform right. We know the numbers here as well. If you look at the ease of doing business, the ease of paying taxes, and this is a huge challenge for the current chairman, FBR, and his team. But I think what I would posit is that we just don't have to look at some elements of the statutory tax rate, for example. We need to step back and look at the broader picture of the complete incidence of taxation and regulatory burden on the formal sector to realize what the arbitrage is between the formal sector and the informal sector. Until we realize this, unfortunately, we're not getting the complete picture, because the formal sector has been under tremendous pressure for the last 10 years or so. And I suspect the kind of pressure we're going to see in the next 1 or 2 years on the formal sector, because of the currency crisis, because of the IMF program, is going to be unprecedented. And we have to look at ways of how to ensure that if we cannot take this pressure off the formal sector, we shift it from the formal sector to the informal sector, so that the arbitrage between the two, the differential between the two, becomes less. So that's the informality arbitrage, and that's what it's led to so far. Deindustrialization, relocation, and informalization. So what needs to be done? Move away from a singular focus on revenue generation. And I think I'm actually saying it to somebody who's already converted for the last so many years. The chairman at FBR, we realizes that. I think the tax policy and design should explicitly recognize the objective of investment promotion and growth enhancement. Recognize the impact of taxation on the formal sector. I suggested to the previous chairman at FBR as well, and I think FBR has already, from what I've heard from him, there's a tax incidence study that need to be done to be able to look at what the actual incidence of taxation, the burden of taxation is on some key sectors of the economy. And I hope that work is proceeding. If it's not, it should be looked at. The World Bank is keen to fund this, and I'm sure they'll look at it. Reduce the tax arbitrage, reduce complexity, eliminate multiplicity, increase the coverage, of course, ensure resource adequacy, introduce fairness and equity. Like I said, unfortunately, the IMF program and tax reform are incompatible. And I don't think our policymakers can do anything about that, because the IMF program, unfortunately, is a need for Pakistan, and we don't have too much latitude in our negotiations or discussions with them. But there are many things that FBR can do at its own level, and I'm sure if we recognize this particular point, that whereas it's important to throw up revenues every 3 months, we need to look at ways of how those revenues are going to come from the informal sector. And I think one trick that we're missing in this is something we tried to do in 2008 for precisely this reason, and that is the introduction of a modern integrated value-added tax. We tend to think of a value-added tax as a revenue measure, but it's not. It's an information measure. And I think at some stage we need to bring the provinces into this and roll out an integrated VAT on goods and services like India has done, to bring up the information, the complete information chain, and that's probably the most potent way we can document the informal sector in Pakistan as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Very short, sweet, and concise. Now we have a panel discussion on this important aspect.